So, Queen Camilla is suddenly being described as battling serious mental collapse and a deep depressive episode. And the more you trace the story backward, the more the official explanation refuses to hold together. Because palace whispers aren't pointing at months of tabloid pressure, or a slow drip of public hostility. They're pointing at one very specific moment. The instant King Charles made it obvious he was about to hand Princess and the keys to the royal family's private money. That is not misfortune. That is not bad luck. That is the kind of detail that makes you stop scrolling and ask, hold on, what just happened here? And the part that bothers me most is the silence. Because nobody inside the palace seems willing to explain the obvious connection out loud. So before we pull the thread any further, if this is your first visit, this channel is the place where royal stories get opened up the moment they start trending. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what drops next. It genuinely keeps this channel moving, and it means I can keep digging into stories like this one. Now here's where the picture gets sharper. According to insiders, King Charles has been quietly drawing up plans for a serious overhaul of how the royal household manages its funds. And this is not small money. We're talking about the Privy Purse, the formal body that handles the monarch's private income, personal allowances, and the internal operating budget that keeps the whole family running. Whoever controls that pot controls the flow of money through the institution. Every department, every property, every official trip, every quiet donation, every internal salary, it all moves through this channel. And the name Charles reportedly wants at the top is his younger sister, Princess Anne. If you know anything about Anne, this choice barely needs defending. She runs a brutal schedule. She treats every minute like a deadline. She has zero tolerance for waste. She is the kind of royal who finishes 4 official duties before lunch and still acts irritated that the day ended. Her reputation inside the institution is built on discipline, not charm. So when the king looked around at bloat, overlapping budgets and quiet leaks of cash, picking Anne to clean it up was almost the obvious move. She is the person you call when spending has gone soft. The trouble is that this exact move cuts straight at Camilla. And that is where the story tilts. Because sources suggest Camilla did not simply disagree with the decision. She read it as a direct attack on her standing inside the family. If Anne ran the purse strings, Camilla's ability to quietly shape internal spending would shrink to almost nothing. Her informal influence would evaporate. Her name would no longer be the one whispered when budgets got padded. And then there was something older sitting underneath the money question. Jealousy. King Charles trusts Anne without question. That trust was built across decades of Anne being the steady one, the one who never flopped publicly, the one who never needed a handler. Camilla has spent years trying to settle into her own position. Watching that level of trust pass over her to Anne was never going to land quietly. Something inside her shifted, and not in a healthy direction. Now, I want to pause for a moment because this is the spot where the story stops behaving like a normal health scare. If Camilla were truly burning out from years of public pressure, you would expect her condition to slide downward over time. You would expect visible fatigue during public duties. You would expect her aides to mention small changes over weeks or months. You would expect at least one appearance where she looked off, and people quietly noticed. None of that, insiders say, actually took place. She was functioning. She was performing. She was moving through her calendar. And then, almost overnight, she collapsed. Instead, her sudden collapse lined up almost perfectly with the moment she learned what Charles was planning. That is not how genuine mental breakdown works. That is how a plan works. And the plan, according to sources, was surprisingly careful. Camilla is alleged to have contacted a private doctor based in Chelsea to arrange a forged medical file. Not a vague note saying she felt off. A full report declaring severe mental exhaustion and major depressive disorder. The kind of document a worried husband would not argue with. The kind of document a king would slow down for. The kind of document that buys time without a single question being asked. Now let me be precise about what is being claimed here. The allegation is that Camilla reached the doctor directly, that she asked for a written diagnosis stating her condition was caused by relentless public hostility, and that she offered payment in return for falsifying the report. If even a slice of that is accurate, this is not a person exaggerating a rough week. This is a coordinated play aimed straight at the king's compassion. And the next layer is where it becomes harder to ignore. Once the fabricated report was in her hands, Camilla reportedly began appearing in front of Charles looking visibly drained. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, the full performance. She would start to cry. She would tell him she could not keep going. She would speak as if every public appearance was costing her something she could not get back. And she wrapped her demand in language that sounded almost generous. She told him that if she were given oversight of the privy purse instead of Anne, It would give her purpose again. It would speed her recovery. It would be the reason she got better. Read that again slowly. A position of complete weakness gets converted into a direct ask for power. She was not asking him to pause the handover. She was asking him to flip it, and place the exact authority he was about to give to and into her hands instead. And she used her health as the ticket. That is a very specific kind of pressure. It only works when the person on the other side cares enough to set the logic aside. For a while it actually looked like it might land. Charles reportedly began to hesitate. He watched his wife look broken. He held a medical report in his hands. He was stuck between his plan to clean up the household and his instinct to protect the person sitting across from him. That is not an easy spot for anyone. And Camilla understood exactly how to use it. But then she pushed one step further, and this is the moment the story rips wide open. According to sources, she did not stop at asking for the privy purse. She also requested a written pledge from Charles passing every piece of Queen Elizabeth II's symbolic jewelry collection to her, and to her children from her earlier marriage. That is not a small request. Those pieces are tied to the history of the monarchy itself. Tiaras, brooches, necklaces that have sat in royal vaults for generations. They carry symbolic weight that goes far beyond their market value. And the fact that she raised it in the middle of a conversation about her mental health tells you almost everything about her real priorities. If recovery was the goal, why would jewelry matter? If healing was the point, why would a written promise about inheritance be needed? If exhaustion was real, why would financial security for children from a previous marriage come up at all? None of those things treat depression. All of those things lock in power. And that is exactly the pattern Princess Anne began to notice. And does not miss details. She clocks small shifts. She reads the room. She has spent her entire life watching how power moves inside palaces, and she knows the difference between genuine distress and a rehearsed one. And according to the reports, she started paying close attention. She noticed Camilla making quiet phone calls the moment Charles stepped out of the room. The rhythm was steady. The king would leave his study. Camilla would pull out her phone and start speaking in a low, careful tone. The voice did not match the picture of a woman on the edge of collapse. She was too focused, too precise, too deliberate. So Anne took a direct step. She placed a trusted member of the palace housekeeping team inside Camilla's private quarters. That person eventually managed to photograph the contents of Camilla's phone. Call logs, message threads, the whole record. When Anne reviewed it, she found exactly what she had started to suspect. The private doctor in Chelsea. The same name on the forged diagnosis. The same number appearing over and over in Camilla's call history. At this point Anne did not file a quiet memo. She did not wait for someone else to act. She drove directly to the doctor's clinic and confronted him in person. And this is where suspicion turns into proof. Because the doctor, according to the report, first tried to defend his work. He said the diagnosis had followed standard procedure. He said he stood by his professional judgment. But when Anne laid out the call records and the message exchanges, he folded. He admitted Camilla had contacted him. He admitted payment had been discussed. He admitted the diagnosis was completely made up. He confirmed there were no real clinical signs supporting claims of mental exhaustion or depression. He confirmed she had pressed him for the wording she wanted, so the document would read the way she needed it to read. That admission changed the shape of everything. And now had a living witness and a full body of evidence. Screenshots. Testimony. The doctor's confession. She gathered all of it and took it straight to the king. Now picture Charles in that moment. He has spent weeks genuinely worried about his wife. He had rearranged his thinking, softened his tone with advisors, and begun walking back a major financial decision out of concern for her. He had begun to doubt his own plan. And then his sister walks into his study and sets a folder on the table showing him that the entire thing was staged. That is more than disappointment. That is a direct blow. According to sources, and laid it out piece by piece. The fabricated symptoms. The secret negotiations. The cash arrangement. The fact that Camilla's drained appearance was a deliberate performance designed to pull on his sympathy. And then she tied it to the bigger picture. Camilla had never wanted to get better. She had wanted control. She had wanted the privy purse. She had wanted the jewelry. She had wanted to lock in her position and her children's inheritance. The health crisis was just the lever. Charles reportedly sat in silence for a long stretch. He was visibly shaken. And then he did something that showed he understood the full weight of what he had just been shown. He called an emergency session of the Royal Council. Not a private chat. Not a quiet compromise. A full meeting with the core members of the council present. Anne and brought the doctor into that room as a witness. The doctor stood in the middle of the chamber and repeated his confession. He broke down every fabricated symptom. He explained how Camilla had directed the process. He confirmed the cash offer. He answered every question without hesitation. With that testimony on record, the entire performance collapsed around her. There was nothing to argue. Nothing to spin. The evidence was on the table in front of everyone who mattered. Charles then issued his judgment. He announced that every previous discussion about giving Camilla any formal authority was void. She was stripped of all control over resources, budgets, and internal household decisions. She lost every privilege tied to royal finances or inheritance arrangements. And then he went further. He ordered her removed from Buckingham Palace that same night. That is a serious escalation. This was not a cooling-off period. This was not a trial separation. This was an official removal from the palace grounds, with the guards told to enforce it without delay. According to the reports, Camilla was forced to pack her belongings in near silence while rain hammered down outside. She had no argument ready. No defense prepared. No way to recover the situation. The image described in the sources is almost cinematic. Camilla stepping into the courtyard as the rain grew heavier, her tears mixing with the water running down her face, her voice cracking as she called out to Charles and asked how he could do this to her after decades together. But read that moment carefully. She was not asking why he was being cruel. She was asking why her plan had failed. She was asking how she had lost everything in a single evening. And that is a very different question because when you line up what she said in public against what she was doing in private, the gap is enormous. Camilla claimed she was collapsing from public pressure. The evidence showed she was coordinating with a doctor to invent that collapse. She claimed she wanted to heal. Her real demands were about money, jewelry, and inheritance. She claimed she was too weak to function. She was strong enough to run a multi-step scheme aimed at her own husband. She claimed she needed support. What she actually needed was access. That is not a health crisis. That is a takeover attempt. And the fact that she framed a takeover attempt as a health crisis makes it worse, because it weaponizes the very compassion Charles was trying to offer her. Now the part that I keep coming back to is Anne's role. She did not need to do any of this. She could have stayed quiet. She could have let the plan move forward. She could have focused on her own schedule and ignored what was happening down the hall. But she noticed the small things and she acted on them. The quiet phone calls. The timing. The mismatch between Camilla's public act and her private behavior. That is what cracked the case open. So what is the deeper lesson here? I think it is straightforward. Transparency matters, not just inside institutions but inside relationships. When someone asks for power and justifies the ask by pointing at their own pain, you have to ask whether the pain is real, or whether the pain is the strategy. When someone refuses to answer direct questions, when they cry at exactly the right moments, when they push for more every time you give ground, that is not proof of weakness. Sometimes that is proof of design. Camilla reportedly stood outside the gates of Buckingham Palace as they closed behind her. The rain was still coming down. She had nothing left. No position. No access. No claim to the finances or the jewelry she had demanded. And the cruelest part for her is that she built the trap herself. She designed the plan. She hired the doctor. She staged the illness. She kept pushing for more until the entire structure fell in on her. And the question now is whether Charles will ever be able to trust her again, because once a betrayal of that size lands, it does not heal quickly. The fact that he expelled her immediately suggests he understood he did not need time to think. He did not need to consult anyone else. He looked at the evidence and he acted. But beyond that single night, there is a larger conversation running inside the palace about what this means for the monarchy going forward. Because this was not a private failing. This was an attempt to steer royal resources and historic assets away from the institution and into private hands. The palace has always guarded that line. The line between the crown and the individual has been held for centuries. The moment someone tries to blur that line for personal gain, the system reacts. And that is exactly what happened here. The council did not hesitate. The king did not hesitate. Because this was never about whether Camilla was a supportive wife. It was about whether the monarchy could allow itself to be steered from within by someone willing to fake her own breakdown. And the answer was a clear no. There are still open questions, and the palace knows the answers will shape public perception for months to come. Will Camilla retreat quietly to a private estate? Will she try to push back through her own contacts, or through sympathetic journalists? Will her children from her earlier marriage attempt to challenge the revocation of any inheritance promises? Will the palace release any official statement about the separation? Or will they simply let the silence do the talking? Those questions matter, but they sit underneath the central fact. The plan failed. The manipulation was exposed. And the person who exposed it was the one person Camilla never expected to be paying attention. Princess Anne. The sister who never chases headlines. The royal who simply does the work. The one who notices when something does not add up and keeps pulling until the truth is sitting on the table. That is the real story here. Not just the collapse of a queen consort, but the quiet competence of a princess who understood that loyalty to the crown means protecting it from everyone, including the people standing inside the palace walls. So yes, the story is dramatic, but the takeaway is simple. If you have to fake a breakdown to get what you want, you should not have it in the first place. And if you are going to run a scheme like this, do not run it in front of Princess Anne, because she will notice, she will investigate, and she will bring the receipts. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.